Let me take you to Numbers chapters 13 and 14. I'm not going to read all of the narrative. A great deal of it is descriptive. If you want to get intimate details, you can check them for yourself. What I like to do at the end of the year is to take stock, take a few minutes to think about how far we've come. In the words of Samuel, to raise our Ebenezer and to say, thus far the Lord has helped us, and to recognize it's through that we're able to go on. At this time of year, they publish the New Year's Honours List. And you'll not be surprised, I'm not on it. And from what I've seen, neither are you, though I've not checked every detail. I did go to the government site and look at the list, but it's 162 pages long. So you might be hidden in there somewhere. It's good that society identifies and rewards those who sacrificially give for the good of their country. One little lad is very much in my mind. I wanted his name, but didn't have time to trawl through the 162 pages, but he was on the news this week. Both his legs had been amputated at the knees, and he has, are they prosthetic legs? And this little tyke, he's been like this since he was 5 or 6 years old, maybe younger, abused by his parents in some way. Glad they never told me how. But he has these legs and he's full of life, and he's been walking to raise money for charity. If you know his name, tell me afterwards. I'd really like to check up more on it. But it's amazing the lengths to which some people can and will go because of the challenge that's in front of them. And as I thought about that, I thought maybe we should recognize that in the church. Here we are, week after week, God's holy handful. And it's an amazing thing that you keep on going. Whatever motivates you or otherwise, surely it's recognized by God as being for his glory. And therefore, you truly need to be in God's New Year's Honours List. And wait a minute, you will be one day when you finally meet him and you'll be rewarded. Can you imagine that? It's an incredible thing just to be a Christian, but rewarded for the service that you've given to him. Surely, then, there's much to be encouraged in the idea that God pays particular attention to our lives and what we're doing and whether we're serving him or not. And these two chapters record what was a profoundly important event in the life of the people of God. He's just delivered them from Egypt. He's brought them across the Red Sea. He's brought them and provided for them. And lo and behold, all they've done is complain. Well, the majority have. All they've done, which they see, is complain. As we were reading it, it said in one of the verses, they had complained. There it is, verse 22. They have put me to the test now these 10 times and have not heeded my voice. They have put me to the test 10 times. Now, you can look at that two ways. You can say, what a rotten bunch. But you can also say, what an incredible God. His people never have been and never will be perfect. No excuse. He understands and knows that if his will is to be accomplished in the world, then he will need to make provision for it. I have 3 subheadings. The first one, there's a reminder of God's promise, which really lies behind everything that happens. Secondly, there's a record of rebellion, which took place among God's people. Thirdly, there's a response which reveals God's patience. I never realized I'd be so husky, but anyway, let's press on. And look first of all at the reminder of God's promise. You see, the God of the Bible is a God of promises, and not empty promises. Promises which are set in stone. I quoted that verse from Timothy earlier on, where it says, though we are faithless, and truly we are at times, he is faithful. He always stands by his promise. That's what it means to be faithful. He made a promise to a certain lady or gentleman once, probably in a church service. And here you are all these years later. It's not been a smooth path if you're human. Why do you keep going? Because you've made a promise. And that promise controls who you are and what you do. God makes promises. In verses 1 and 2 of chapter 13, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I'm giving, please notice the present tense, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. And then run your eye down a little bit to verse 5, where it says, from the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat, the son of Hori. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb. I think I've got the wrong verse there. It must be... yeah, anyway, God sets these people apart. I must have lost a digit. Yeah. And it shall be, I've got it written here, when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore to your father to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. It was Exodus chapter 13, verse 5. That's why I've confused you and me. But this is the driving force behind everything which has happened. He swore to your fathers to give you, and that's looking way back to the time of Abraham. Hundreds of years, 400 years plus. Think back 400 years from now, and you're way back into the dim mists of time. But God's promise had stood over that time, and the reason that these people are now on the edge of the promised land is because God is a God of promises. The people had always known the promises, but hadn't always fully embraced them. And I find some help there, because I think we are the same. When this event is discussed in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1 and verse 21, it says, look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up and possess it, as the Lord God of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not fear or be discouraged. And every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us, and let them search out the land for us, and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go up, and of the cities into which we shall come. The plan pleased me well, so I took 12 of your men, one man from each tribe. That would indicate to us that though they had God's promise, that in the background to chapter 13, there were already those who were saying, wait a minute, let's check it out. And God graciously allows them to check it out. God's promises are at the core of the Bible's teaching. God's promises are given at the very beginning of history, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. God promises that one of our offspring will crush the serpent's head. When mankind has become so wicked that God can't see any good in them, that's what Genesis 6 tells us. The thoughts of men were only evil continually. God selects a man and a family and then promises that he will preserve them through judgment. Noah built an amazing vessel that preserved alive, the people of God, and brought them through. And of course, it climaxes in the promise never to flood the earth again. In Genesis 12, Abraham receives a promise of the land. He comes to a country he had never been and never seen. And he's told that not only will he prosper in the land, but that his offspring shall possess it and be a blessing to the whole world. And you could take time and go through the whole of the Old Testament, just looking for this theme, and you would find it in David, in Samuel, in the prophets. We've just been through Isaiah, full of the outworking of promises. God, the God of the Bible, is a God of promises. For all the promises of God, says 2 Corinthians 1:20, are yes and amen in Christ Jesus. They have their confirmation, establishment, and fulfillment in Christ. That's a very important principle, because there are people who are misusing the promises of God in the Old Testament to justify the things which are causing some of the modern conflict in what was the Holy Land. The promises are yes and amen. Everything in the Old Testament is heading up like an hourglass, if you can use that picture in your mind, to the point at which Jesus is revealed as the well-beloved Son of God, to the point where he is sacrificed on the cross at Calvary and rises from the dead to create the new Israel of God, the people that would be God's people from then forward. And he made provision for them. One of the troubles in the Old Testament was that though they had these promises, they didn't have a heart for them. It's often overlooked, but in Deuteronomy 10, you'll see that God explains to them that they need their heart changed, but they didn't. They went on persisting in their own belligerent understanding of religion. And the minor prophets at the end of the Old Testament are very clear that this is a stiff-necked people. They don't have a heart for God. So what does God do about it? He sends his Son, and through his Son, he pours out his Holy Spirit so that his people on the earth are now Jews and Gentiles who believe in Jesus Christ. They are made by grace into a people of God, and the fulfillment of his promises are the very bedrock of their hope and expectation. Back in the book of Isaiah 59:21, the prophet speaks for God. As for me, says the Lord, this is my covenant with them. You have to understand, you see, that the old covenant was in place, but the new covenant was coming. This is my covenant with them. This is what I'm going to commit myself to for them. My Spirit who is upon you, and my words which I have put in your mouth shall not depart from your mouth, nor from the mouth of your descendants, nor from the mouth of your descendants' descendants, says the Lord, from this time forth and forevermore. A change is coming, where God will take out the heart of stone and give men and women a heart of flesh. Ezekiel 36, I think it is. And the effect of that change is there will be a new people of God who will be committed to the gospel for all of their days and will live depending on the promises of God. That's how you became a Christian, isn't it? It wasn't an intellectual thing. Well, it wasn't only an intellectual thing. You were brought into an awareness that you were a sinner, that God was holy, and that God had made provision in Jesus, and that God had promised if you would trust him, then you would be saved. And you trusted him by grace. You said, Lord, I don't want to live my life by myself. I want to live it to please you. And behold, you've been living in the good of that promise ever since. the reason you're here, and the reason that you should probably be on God's New Year's honours list is that you're quite rare in this modern generation. Multitudes laugh and scoff. But by grace, that promise has become a reality. He delivered you from your sin and judgment, and you're resting in the promises of God. Have you ever understood how important the promises of God are? Many of the saints of old give us lessons. Men like Hudson Taylor, I hope you know who he is, I'm not going to explain. Men like Hudson Taylor left his country with his wife to serve God in China, with nothing but the promises of God. There's a little quote from him. When he was in a particularly difficult time, he wrote to his wife, "We have 25 cents and all the promises of God." And all the promises of God. So every believer understands the importance of God's promises. They are the foundation of our salvation. They are the power to live a holy life. They are the driving force. Because by God's promises, we're brought into the good of his purpose, to have a bride for his son. And we will indeed enter into that glory of a new heaven and a new earth. And it's a great encouragement for the unbeliever, you see, that these promises are alive today. I came across a little quote by Mr. Spurgeon. He says, 98% of people he met, including the criminals he visited in England's prison, told him that they believed the Bible to be true. But the vast majority had never made a personal, life-changing commitment to Jesus Christ. And he sums it up like this. For them, believe was not an active verb. Something I've wrestled with quite a bit recently. You see, what's the difference between I believe it's all true, but never entering into the good of it? It's like sitting down to your favorite meal and refusing to pick up a knife and fork. The promises of God are not simply there to impress you about his love, his kindness, and his mercy. They're there for you to take to yourself. And even as you sit today, I invite you to recommit yourself to Christ. Might be a long time for some of you, it is for me. And to recognize that my whole hope and confidence rests in the character of the God who promises. But then you get this amazing account of rebellion. That God's people, when tested, are often shown to be less than what they could be or should be. In actual fact, again, I go back to the book of James, that tests come to our lives specifically to help us see what's in our hearts, to show us what we're like when there's just you and God. And that's certainly what you get in the long narrative of chapter 13. We're told that Moses acted in obedience to God, verse 3 of 13. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. God said, select them. Moses said, I've got them. Now, off you go. Run right down to verse 21, because there's no benefit, is there, in going into all their names. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. And then he goes into details of how they went through the land. It's possible to find Bible maps that show you the ins and outs of it, but quite clearly they went right through what would be modern Israel and Palestine together. And then in verse 26, now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told them and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. You see, they had obeyed up to that point. If you had watched them, you would have been impressed by their commitment to carry out the word of God and to do it. God had promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. They had found it. But look where I stopped. Go back to verse 27. Verse 28. Nevertheless, that flags a warning, doesn't it? Something's going wrong. The people who dwelt in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the river. Problem after problem after problem. Okay, God makes promises, but here are things that are too big for God's promises. Don't tell me you've never thought that way. Don't tell me that you've never been in that position where you've looked at what's going on and you've said, this is not possible. I often quote William Carey. They laughed at him, the cobbler from Leicestershire somewhere, wasn't he? When he put the map up beside his bench and working there and told his workmates that he was going to take the gospel to India. They scoffed and mocked him. And when he tried to go, the British India Company wouldn't even give him a place on one of their ships. He would rock the boat. Quite literally, yeah? He would rock the boat. It wasn't politically right, but that didn't put Carey off. And he ends up in Serampore, isn't it? Where he works for God for years with only one convert. People would say, what a wasted life. See, we told you. But what you don't hear is that he translated the Bible into, I think it was 9 Indian languages, which then gave the foundation for the work that was to go on for years. God is bigger than every one of our problems. Let's take that to heart as a church. Your problem is standing in the pulpit. It needs to be replaced. Or that's your most imminent problem, maybe. Do you think it'll happen, or is this too big for God? I'm continually challenged by it. Do I have the faith to make progress, to keep expecting, to keep on looking? Or am I like this bulk of the Israelites? Thank God for the record of Caleb and Joshua by implication. Verse 30. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses. That wouldn't have been an easy task, would it? Shh, listen. And said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome them. Is the man off his rocker? Yes, for I believe that's a true definition of faith. Jesus talked about faith moving mountains. We talk about faith as an intellectual thing that we hold to ourselves and try to keep under control, but biblical faith is revolutionary. It keeps on doing what God has said is to be done because it's read in God's word what he's doing. And when it comes to challenges, it doesn't see mountains, it sees opportunities. That's an active faith, isn't it? Somebody's not yet a Christian and they look at the evidence, but they see these problems. They might never even have formed those problems into words on their lips, but they've got something before them that they see as an issue which is too big for God, or which they don't want to let go of. I put it to you, friends, look at Caleb. I thought there would be a passage in a chapter further on where we're told about Caleb going in triumphantly and taking the land. We do know that he did go with Joshua, but he sort of fades into obscurity until in the middle of the book of Joshua, he appears and he says to Joshua, hey, remember, God promised me. That's faith. That's standing on the promises. That's holding fast. That's refusing to allow the problems to rule. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. Have you met those kind of people? All they can see are the problems. It's right and true. You do need to see the problems, but you need to take them within the context of God's purpose and promises and see them as opportunities. And when they're that way, then you will overcome. When you're that way, you can overcome. I read chapter 14 before you. What was your reaction when you read those first 4 verses? Those people who saw the problems were so determined that they were for turning back. They were for throwing in the towel. They were for saying, this cannot be done and we are not going to do it. They complained against Moses and Aaron. And then they were saying, if only we had died in the land of Egypt. I wish we had never started this. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? Can you imagine that? Pharaoh would be rubbing his hands. We've got you now, you rotten lot. I had you as slaves before, but you'll be worse than dogs to me now. But that's how afraid they are. That's how unbelieving they are. They'll do anything except be what God's called them to be. And as I read this chapter, I think there's something here for us, friends, to get a hold of, not to hold on. That it is possible for God's people to dishonor him. They were being influenced by the world. Chapter 11 through to 14 list 4 different problems. And way back in chapter 11, when they're desperate for a bit of meat to eat, you find part of the context reveals something to you. 11:4, now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense craving. So the children of Israel also wept again and said, who will give us meat to eat? Notice the phrase, the mixed multitude, because this reveals that the people Moses were leading were 2 different groups. There were hangers-on, if you want, folks who just thought it would be a good idea and there might be some benefit in it for them. And they have been the curse on God's people in every generation and in the modern generation. In fact, if my perception is not too twisted, they've overtaken the modern churches. People who are in it for what they can contribute and what they can get from it, instead of people trusting in God's promises. I don't have enough time to tease out all the things I would like to here. Notice the contrary behavior of Moses and Aaron. They're the two leaders, aren't they? They've been appointed by God. They're being used by God. Verse 5, they fell on their faces before the assembly. Don't misunderstand it as suggesting they were bowing to the assembly. What they're doing is they're bowing in prayer to God before the assembly. They're recognizing that this is a problem they cannot fix. Whenever you get, especially in our congregational churches, whenever you get a body in the congregation that are determined to have their will done, there's sometimes only one way to go, and that's to the mercy seat. Because there are some things that only God can fix. Joshua and Caleb tear their clothes, a sign in the Old Testament of repentance, of horror, a sign that they're aghast. And isn't that the case for modern Christianity? The leader of the Church of England was given a knighthood in the New Year's honours list. Be gentle with me. A knighthood. And yet here is a man who has taken Christianity down the plug hole. He has presided over declaring what is sinful to be acceptable to God. What on earth is going on? Can it ever be changed? I sometimes look in the media, the news, and I say to God, I want revival, but I look at this lot, Lord, and it's beyond comprehension. No, it's not. You really do need to read books, history books in particular, and watch how God raises up one man or one woman here and there, and through that one man or woman changes the world. Could you be that man or woman? Should you be that man or woman? You might not be able to change the whole world, but you will have an effect on the world around you. You would have thought it would have impressed the mob. But you find at the beginning of verse 10 these words, and the congregation said to stone them with stones. What a horrible picture. We'll sort this for ourselves. We'll decide what the church should believe and pursue. That was the problem in the Old Testament. And that's the problem in so many modern Christian organizations that are based on the Old Testament rather than on Christ. They're more concerned about their rituals and their robes and their buildings than they are about following Jesus. Remember, all the promises of God are yes and amen. Where? In him. He's who it's all about. And so they're breathing murder to these people. This account comes up in the book of Psalms and at least twice in the book of Hebrews. In the book of Psalms, it says in Psalm 95, "For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, and the sheep of his hand. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion." This is the rebellion. "As in the day of trial in the wilderness, when your fathers tested me. They tried me, though they saw my work. For 40 years I was grieved with that generation, and said to its people who go astray in their hearts, and they do not know my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." If you were reading with me in the text, you'd have said one of their objections was our children will be killed. Well, the sad truth is the 40 years in the wilderness All the adults died, and the children went in to the promised land. God didn't strike them dead immediately. He just wore them out. And so these passages are a real stimulus and challenge to us about how we are living for or not living for God in this present day. And again, the importance of living out God's promises. You know what God has said, I will build my church. You and I have a role to play in that, but God's building the church. Are you relying on him? Are you fitting in to do the part that only you can do by God's grace? For that's the function of a church. It's a body with many members, each having a role and a part. There are no passive members of the Church of Christ. Everybody's a worker. You've trusted him to save you. Now trust him to bring you home. I read about an old lady who was in hard times, and somebody went to visit her, and she was very poor. And they said to you, are you on your own? Yes, my son's in Australia. Does he ever do anything to help you? No, was the reply from the woman. He does write to me once a month and sends me a little picture with his letter. So the man asked to see the pictures, and they found each of them to be a £10 note. A promise to pay the bearer on demand. There was no need for her to be in poverty. God's promises stand. You read this book, and it's not just an interesting story about what happened to the ancient people of God. It's an enlightening picture of the challenge that's always been before the people who would serve God. Am I ready to go forward? Am I willing to go forward? I want to finally get to one point, and I've 3 minutes to go on my clock. I want you to see God's response, and I'm going to have to summarize it. First of all, God appears. The end of verse 10. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before the children of Israel. I'm going to paraphrase what comes next. And God said to Moses, just stand back, I'm going to wipe the floor with them. And what's more, Moses, this is the second time it's happened. You remember when you came down from the mountain and made that golden calf? And I said to you then, stand back and I'll make a new people out of you. What an opportunity. If Moses had been an egoist, he would have said, go for it. But he wasn't. He was a man who knew God's promises. And instead of saying to the Lord, get on with it, he actually enters into what we call intercession. And he uses arguments with God. Please notice I say he uses argument. He doesn't have an argument. And he uses an argument with God, which I believe God had prepared him to use. Then the Egyptians will hear it, verse 12. For by your might you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of the land. They have heard that you, Lord, are among these people, that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands above them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill these people as one man, then the nations which have heard of your fame shall speak, saying, and again I need to paraphrase, they'll say that God wasn't up to it. So what Moses is doing, he's bringing that argument from Scripture of which God has revealed who he is, the God of purpose, the God of promise. It began in the garden. It went right down through Noah and Abraham and all the sons of Abraham. Joseph in Pharaoh's country, the people being in Egypt. The one thing that did not change was God's promise. And his character was revealed in how he fulfilled those promises. You meant it for evil, says Joseph, but God meant it for good. Genesis 49. And he brought to pass what he had purposed. Now Moses is saying, listen, Lord, if you dump this bunch, and they deserve it, the world around are going to say, he wasn't up to much, was he? He got them this far, but no further. And it's that prayer of Moses in its bigger picture, which I just want to focus on in a minute. I could use it to say it becomes our job then to pray, but I'm not going there today. I put it to you that this is a picture of what the book of Hebrews calls one greater than Moses. How has the church survived when there have been so many troublemakers, so many complainers, so many problems? There's one reason. What occupies Jesus at the present time? You never asked yourself, he went into heaven, what is he doing? He ever lives, says the book of Hebrews, to make intercession for you. You see it in John 17, where he prays for the disciples then and the disciples who follow. And I put it to you, the only reason Christianity has survived is because Jesus never stops praying for us. Can you imagine his prayer? I might be a wee bit irreverent, but let me just float this boat, if you would. The Father says to the Son, look at that church. It's just not up to scratch. There's only a handful of them anyway. I'm wasting my resources pouring them in there. And Jesus says, wait a minute, Father. Those are the people for whom I died. Those are the ones that carry my name. My reputation as a savior is tied up in their continued survival. Remember that you're the God of mercy. And you get that little picture then at the end of chapter 1 in Ephesians, where we're told that Christ reigns. I love that word. He doesn't just take opportunity to do things. Reigns over all things. Can you finish it? It's verse 22. On behalf of his church. That's not the building. Never has been. That's the bums on the seats. Or it should be. And as I've gone through this chapter, and I'm going to really bring it to an end, I do believe that we need to put him on our New Year's honours list. And we need to come to him and say, Lord, it's incredible that 2,000 years after your death, we're still here. Your purpose is clearly not fully worked out yet. Otherwise, we'd hear the trumpet and we'd be summoned. Lord, give me the grace to make your promises the thing that controls how I think, what I do, how I set my goals, because I want your glory to be brought forth. And where is God's glory most clearly seen? In men and women coming to faith in Christ. We have loved ones, we have neighbours, we have friends and contacts. Do you take them to God and say, Lord, pray for these? Save them? Or have you, like I sometimes do, I confess it, sunk into that pit of despair which says, well, Lord, I know what you've done in the past, but we don't see much evidence today. I've pushed the boat on time. And final comment. It's many years ago now. In our minister's fraternal, we took a little survey. How many people are being converted across Yorkshire? And praise God, there was a number, but very few. And that's why we started the Prayer for Revival group. It can't go on like this, Lord. We need people to be the church. And we need them now. Are you asking? Are you depending? Are you relying? Are you expecting? Oh, that God would teach. Fabulous thing to study, especially when you're full of the cold and trying to just get through the day. It's a fabulous narrative. And it's used in Hebrews twice as a warning for Christians. Do not harden your heart. And that's the danger. The unbelief of our generation. We are bombarded in music and media. You know, this Christmas in particular, Christ has been pushed right out of Christmas. It no longer belongs to him. Just a few religious cranks want it. Oh, that God would give us the vision, the faith, the perspective to believe that there's a work to be done in Ryedale even yet. Great amount of seed sown. Water it with prayer and expect the increase. Amen. Let me just pray. Father, I bless you and thank you. This word has done my heart and soul a power of good. Forgive me for being too long-winded so that I've not been able to explain it as you've explained it to me. But you can keep on speaking to these people, Lord. I pray that you will do. And at the end of this year, shall really be a stimulus to give you the credit and the glory for what you're doing and going to do. And to thank you for being on your New Year's Honours list in Jesus' name. Amen. Hymn number 625. Oh, my soul, arise and bless your Maker. You cannot not bless him when you recognize the persistence of God to fulfill his purpose. 625. My soul, arise and bless your Maker, for he is your master and your friend. So to wrath, but rich in tender mercy, worship the Savior Jesus. King of grace, his love is overwhelming. Bread of life, he's all I'll ever need. For his blood has purchased me forever, bought at the cross of Jesus. And I will sing for all my days of heaven's love come down. Each breath I take will speak his praise until he calls me home. When I wake, I know that he is with me. When I'm weak, I know that he is strong. things as yet unseen. Give me faith to move in works of power, making me more like Jesus. And I will sing for all my days of heaven's love come down. Each breath I take will speak his praise until he calls me home. Then one day I'll see him as he sees me, face to face, the lover and the love. No more words, the longing will be over, there with my precious Jesus. Then one day I'll see him as he sees me, face to face, the lover and the love. No more words, the longing will be over. It beggars belief, Lord, but we know that you've said it, and so we do believe it. We trust you, we look to you, and we expect you, O Lord, to fulfill all you've promised in our lives and in this day for Jesus' sake. Amen. Do join us in the room behind for refreshments, and do take these calendars